Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Lawvere, and I'm joined with my co-host, Chris Crawford. Thank you for tuning back in to our interview with Derek Melton. This is part 2.
So I know you have a tire hammer, you have some air hammer, and some other fly press and some other, big forging tools like that. I think a treadle hammer in your shop. Just real briefly, just talk about the hammer type tools that you have, saving the tire hammer for last. And then I want you to talk about your involvement with tire hammers and the building process. And before you do, I do want to go back and ask a question real quick about Lyle Wynn. Are they still offering that class, Tools to Make Tools?
Yeah, so Lyle Wynn was teaching the Tools to Make Tools class, and then he handed that off to Palmer Robbins. And so Palmer Robbins is a blacksmith here in Pearl, and he's currently teaching that class. And then Brian Brazil and Ed Brazil, Brian and Ed are brothers. They're out in Oklahoma. They still teach the class out there. And there's a number of people that have gone through that curriculum that also teach the Tools to Make Tools curriculum. And it's a particular curriculum and a particular way of going through a progression of tools. And not just anybody out there can teach the class. You have to have Brian Brazil's blessing, basically, to teach the class. And so there's probably, I think, 4 or 5 people out there, I think, that are still teaching that. So it's very much available. If you want to take the class, you can find some of the guys that are teaching it. Mark Ling comes to mind right off the bat. He's a blacksmith in Texas. Andrew Larson in Kentucky. I think he's in Tennessee or Kentucky. He's teaching it. So yeah, it's available. It's out there.
Okay. All right. I just want to follow up with that. All right. So getting to your hammers, and then talk about your tire hammer, and then talk about the tire hammer class that you've been involved in, and then kind of finish that with how others might get involved with that if they're interested.
Yeah. So I got my first power hammer right before I went on Forged in Fire. So I got an Anyang ST33, which is a 33-pound air hammer. And a great little hammer, really nice, but ran super fast like a sewing machine, super, super fast. And so anyway, that hammer was the first power forging tool that I had I think I went 15 something years before I got a power forging tool. And so I got that, and then I got a fly press, a number 4 fly press. And then over the past few years, I've upgraded to different kinds of power hammers. I've gone from an Anyang 33, then I got a Dave Custer power hammer, which is a type of tire hammer. It was a 70-pound tire or a 65-pound tire hammer, I think. And then I went and took a class from Clay Spencer. And the class was called Tire Hammer Tools. And in that class, it was 3 of us. We went to Clay's shop in Alabama and spent a Friday and Saturday making tools using tire hammers in his shop. And let me back up. I took this tire hammer tools class before I got my Dave Custer tire hammer. And so when I went and took this class from Clay, it was a class on how to make tooling for power hammers and how to use power hammers with this tooling. And that was the first time I had ever used a tire hammer, was in Clay's shop. And I was absolutely stunned at how great they were. Before I went to his class, I had the Anyang 33 in my shop, and my only experience with power hammers up to that point had been Little Giants and my little air hammer. And I just kind of naively had this idea that a tire hammer just couldn't be as good, And I went to Clay's shop, took this class, and was just blown away by how great the tire hammers were. And I left his shop on a mission to get a tire hammer, and so then I found a guy in Texas that was selling a Dave Custer tire hammer, and so I sold the 33 and ran to Texas and bought that tire hammer, and well, for a short time, I had both of them in the shop. I had the Dave Custer tire hammer and the Anyang 33. But not long after that, there was a class that was put on in Louisiana at Chapapila Crafts, and that's John Perillou's school in Louisiana. And John and Clay Spencer and Curtis Herman. Curtis is a guy out of Oklahoma who metal fabricator, great guy, does all kinds of really cool machine work. Those three guys got together to put on a tire hammer class at John Perillou's shop. And when I heard about that, I thought, well, I'm going to sell my tire hammer and go take this class and build one. That way I'll know how the hammer works really well. I'll have a brand new hammer. And so I went and did that first class in Louisiana with 30 guys, I think, or the first class was 30. Yeah, the first class was 30 or 31 guys, and we built 32 tire hammers in 2.5 days. And I was hooked not only on the hammers, but on the experience of going to the class itself, because you're around a big group of people that are all excited about power hammers. You're working together pretty hard and intensely on a product that you're all going to take home. And it's a big weekend of camaraderie and, fabrication and welding and building. And it's just a great time. And then the bonus is at the end of the weekend, everybody gets to go home with their own tire hammer. And so I've done that now. I've done the class 3 times, and I've sold one of the tire hammers from one of the classes, and then I've gone and bought one from somebody that was in a class. And so I think all total, I've purchased 4 of those hammers, and I have 3 of them still in the shop now.
Yeah, I didn't realize you still had 3 in there. That's cool. You're running out of room, aren't you? I mean, your shop, you got to be running out of room.
I'm way out of room. I've got 2 fly presses. I've got a number 9 fly press. I've got a number 6 fly press. I've got 3 tire hammers. I've got 2 inline treadle hammers and a hydraulic press, the Anyang 88, and 2 belt grinders. Yeah, it's all stuffed in there. It's just enough room for me to walk around to each one of the tools. But 2 of one of the tire hammers and one of the treadle hammers is not in use right now. They're just parked in the corner until I do some demolition of the shop. There's a corner of my shop that used to be like an office, and I'm going to take those 2 walls out and put those tools in place, and then I'll have a line of all these tire hammers and treadle hammers all in a row. And the idea will be I'll be able to have a different die set or different tooling in each one of those machines, and I'll just be able to walk down that row when I'm going through the process of, if I'm doing a production run of stake turners or whatever, I can have each die or each process in each tool, and it really, really speeds things up, when you have multiple tools set up that way.
Well, one of the tools that you didn't mention there, I know probably just because I asked you about hammer type tools, but tell us about your induction forge. What made you want one, and what has been the benefit of that to you? And explain what an induction forge is too, because I didn't really know what one was until you got into it and started talking about it online.
Well, I've had one for 2 years. I'm I'm known as the godfather of induction. I don't know why, but probably just because I documented the process. But I was not the first guy to do induction stuff. I was probably the first guy with a big social media following to really push it, but I was hardly the first guy out there to do it. Um, the first guy that was really instrumental in getting induction forges into the blacksmithing or bladesmithing arena was a guy named Grant Sarver. And Grant has passed on now, but Grant was the first guy to really bring those things over to the U.S. and push them out en masse to the maker community. But where I saw them first and where I really got excited was at that tire hammer tools class at Clay's shop, at Clay Spencer's shop. He had two induction machines in there, and that was my first time to use one. But induction forging, it looks like a big computer. It looks like a desktop computer. It's got a bunch of buttons and dials on the front, and sticking right out of the front is a copper, a big coil of copper, and it's got a foot pedal, and it's connected to 220-volt electricity, and it takes that electricity in. It has water cooling that runs through the machine. It basically works on the principle of, I'm going to butcher this, and I know there's going to be somebody listening to this that knows a lot more about induction forging than I do, and they're going to be rolling their eyes at my description of what it is. But the best way I know how to explain it is, you remember when you were in school and you would take a nail and you'd wrap a copper wire around a nail, and then you connect those wires to a battery, and it would magnetize the nail. Well, induction machines basically do that really quickly in an oscillating fashion. Like it's reversing the magnetism back and forth, the polarity back and forth really fast. And because it's doing that, the molecules inside the steel are agitated, and it creates heat in the steel really quickly. And so, just for an example, you can stick a piece of like half-inch square into an appropriately sized coil on the induction forge and press the pedal, and in about 30 seconds, you're going to be at a yellow heat. At 45 to 60 seconds, it's going to be throwing sparks and almost melting. It's extremely fast, localized heat. And the first place that I saw one of those machines was at the tire hammer tools class. We used those induction machines to bend steel for some of the tooling that we were making in that class. That was the first time I had ever used one in person and seen one in person. And being able to walk over to those machines with a piece of 1-inch by 1/4-inch flat bar, press a pedal, and then bend it by hand in like 10 seconds just blew me away. And so my first mission when I left that tire hammer tools class was acquire a tire hammer. The second mission was acquire an induction forge. And so I got the tire hammers under my belt. And then after a year or two of forging with tire hammers, I got my first induction forge. And I've been using it for 2 years straight now. And it's changed the way I do everything pretty much. I mean, I don't really use propane or coal anymore. I would say 97% of the forging that I do in my shop happens with induction forging.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you started your own podcast several years ago. Tell us about why you started it, what's your podcast about, and how it's been going.
So yeah, I started my own podcast. I guess a little over a year ago. No, it's a little longer than that because I was recording the podcast when I was driving to and from the hospital job, and I'm working from home now, and I know I've been working from home for over a year. So anyway, I used to listen to this podcast 7, 8 years ago. I got really into triathlon, and I was doing all kinds of running and biking and swimming, and there was a guy that I listened to. There was a podcast that I listened to called Zen and the Art of Triathlon. And it was this guy, and it was just him grabbing his phone while he was in the car, and he was talking about his triathlon training. You know, he would talk about what he was eating. He would talk about what kind of training he was doing, what he was doing on the bike, or what kind of swims he was doing. And it was just really, it was off the cuff. He would just record, 7, 8 minutes, and then he'd come back and say, okay, well, I'm back from my swim now, and this is how it went. And he'd talk for another 15 minutes about some upcoming race. And, he would do 20, 30-minute episodes of his podcast with just these little short snippets that he recorded throughout his week. And I was listening to all kinds of blacksmith podcasts and metalworking podcasts, any that I could find. And I thought it would be fun to start my own, just to basically have somebody to talk to about forging, And so I started doing the same kind of format. I would mount my phone in a holder in the truck, and when I cranked the truck up and took off to go to work, I'd start talking about whatever I was working on in the shop, and I would do that over 2 or 3 days, and then I would take all those pieces and I'd shove them together into one audio file and post it up as an episode. And I just recorded episode 67 today, and it was a 13-minute episode of me talking about just the things that I've been working on lately in the shop and with 3D printers. It's basically just me talking about the things I'm interested in. And so I wouldn't say that it's been wildly successful. I think, I don't know, when I just looked at the app today, I think the last episode had 168 plays. So, I've got 80 some odd thousand people following me on Instagram, 115,000 people following me on TikTok, and I had 150 plays of a podcast. So I don't know what kind of social media math that is, but that doesn't sound like it's wildly successful. But it's just another outlet for me to talk about the things I'm doing and to put more media out there.
Well, I'll try to go out there. I got 2 or 3 different podcast players, so I'll go try to at least load it up in each one of them, help your count go up.
Yeah. Just hit play and then quit.
Yeah. So you mentioned social media a couple of times, and you just mentioned about how many followers is it again you have? What are those numbers again?
Like, I don't know, last I looked, it was over 80,000 on Instagram. Wow. And 115,000 on TikTok. And I don't really count Facebook.
Yeah.
Probably 4,000 or 5,000 on Facebook.
Yeah, that is crazy, man. I know there are people that have more than that too, but for me, that's unimaginable. You've definitely figured out how to use social media, and to drive customers to your business. I remember us having this conversation, Derek. We were, I don't remember if it was when I was there at your place where we're filming the hammer making video, but we were at Penn's. I know where we were when we had the conversation. We were over there at Penn's grabbing some lunch, and you were talking about using social media to grow your business. And I think you were particularly talking at that time about TikTok, because I'm old. I had no idea. I mean, I knew what TikTok was from just hearing it here and there or whatever, but I hadn't been on it, and I just didn't see any. I thought it was just a place where kids dance and that kind of stuff or whatever. But
yeah,
and I was hoping you weren't on there dancing. I mean, I was scared to go look.
You never know.
So, you never know. That's why I'm not following you on there, because I just didn't know what I was going to see. But
that's really what has grown my platform is my dance move.
Well, so if you don't mind, just take a few minutes and talk about the benefits of social media, the pros and cons of social media. And this is another conversation that you and I have had about the kind of the dangers of social media, is that it is easy to become prideful. But also social media is a great tool for driving customers to your business. So if you don't mind, talk about the pros and cons of social media and how you have incorporated it or used it as a marketing tool and and just a way to advance not just your business but advance the craft overall.
Yeah. Well, I look at it as just another tool in the rack. It's social media for me from a business perspective is no different than any of the hammers in my shop. It's another tool that I need to understand and know how to use if I'm going to get more eyes on the things that I want to make. If I want to support myself and get something out of the hobby, monetarily, then I need to sell things. And if I want to sell things, I need to get eyes on those things. And so it's important to look at it as a tool, but also not to be so cold and callous about it so that you represent that idea out to the following. I mean, that's kind of a confusing way to put it, but I guess what I'm saying is I'll look at the social media platforms as tools, but the community engagement that I get on those is kind of like a lucky uh, byproduct of it. I really enjoy the community engagement on Instagram more than on any other platform. I feel like I get people that comment on my posts and have discussions and instant messages and stuff on Instagram where I feel like it's more of a real community, you know. Whereas over on TikTok, it's like it's a whole different feeling and it's a different kind of audience over there. And my main purpose on TikTok is just to try to drive traffic towards my website. It's not so much to generate and create community over there because I don't feel it the same on that platform. But I think today in 2023, if you're not using social media, if you're a maker and you're trying to sell things, if you're trying to be involved in a maker community, you have to use social media to be involved and to get eyes on your product. And so it's a smart thing to try to learn what works on those platforms. So years ago, when I first started getting into it, I wanted to see what was it that made successful social media accounts successful. And so I started just doing the basic research. I started going to YouTube and just watching people who their channel was all about what current algorithms were successful or not on YouTube or on Instagram or on Facebook, and why one type of content was working better than another. And so I started trying to gear content. And what I learned over time and over looking at all these things was that all these successful strategies had one thing in common, and that was just be honest and be real. Be you. Don't try to be somebody that you're not. And that sounds cliche, and that sounds like something that people have said over and over and over. But I mean, Chris, you've known me since I was in high school, right?
I knew you when
And
you were the old Derek.
yeah, that's right. That's a running joke. And so, but when you watch my social media, do you see the Derek that you've always known, or do you see some different Derek?
Yeah, I see you as I've always known you. I mean, you're right. I mean, it's a at least yours seems to be what I would consider transparent. It's not.
Right, and there's a limit to that. I mean, I don't want to put my whole life out on social media.
Right.
There's obviously things about my life that I don't share on social media, but I guess the point I'm making is I don't want to be somebody on social media that I'm not in real life. And my goal in social media has for a little while, I'll be honest, for a little while, I was like, I think when I had like 10 to 15,000 followers on Instagram, I got wrapped up in follower count. I was like, man, I've got to post regularly. I've got to post 3 videos a week, and I've got to daily post a story, and I was trying to do all these things that people were saying would, get more people to follow you and all this kind of stuff. And I kind of got wrapped up in it. And then I got burned out on that. And I was just like, this is just for the birds, it's just not fun. And so then I just wanted to be helpful, because I found that the accounts that I was the most invested in, the people that I wanted to watch the most, and the people's accounts that I was paying most attention to were the people that I was learning things from, right? And so then I thought, okay, well, certainly every time I go to someone else's shop, I learn something. When I travel to your shop, I learn something. When I watch Forged in Fire, my favorite part of watching Forged in Fire is the home forged portion, because I get to see how someone else is using their tools to do something. And so I just started thinking, I'm going to share every little thing I'm doing on social media, because somebody out there has not seen someone using a drill press like this, or they've not seen somebody using induction heating or whatever. And so that became my mode on social media was, is what I'm sharing helpful to somebody? And when I started doing that, then my social media started exploding. And it was like, I wasn't paying attention to trends or analytics or anything. It was just like, that really seemed to resonate. And so that's kind of been my shtick, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, on social media is I want to be authentic. I want to be the same Derek to everybody, and then I want to be helpful, and that's turned out to be a good thing.
Along the same lines is really what I'm hoping to get out of this podcast is that I think I might have mentioned this in the episode where I got interviewed, but with my videos and the things that I put out, particularly the things that I charge, my goal is to give people a good product at a fair price, and even with a podcast, there's not a price involved. There's a time involved for people to listen. And so one of the goals and the reasons that I ask the kinds of questions that I do here is I'm hoping that these things help somebody. When I ask you about how you got started, what tools, what book did you use, these kinds of things, hoping that the information that our guests share will point people into a direction that will help them grow in their maker's ability, or in their, in making what they make, whether that's blacksmithing or knives or anything like that. So I totally understand what you're saying. That's, we talked about this. It is easy to get wrapped up, like you're saying, in the subscriber count or followers or whatever it's called for whatever social media, the likes and all that stuff. And I think that is where the pride comes in, and there's a danger there. But
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had a period recently of massive account growth on Instagram, where I just exploded on Instagram because of a few Reels videos that I posted, and they went viral. And because they went viral, I got more people looking and more people that followed. And there is this kind of temptation to feel like, oh man, well now I've got this many followers, and now I'm really something, but that follower count doesn't mean anything if you're a jerk, and it doesn't mean much if you're not providing some value to people. You might get 20,000 people that follow you because of some crazy viral video, but if you're not doing something helpful or interesting to them, then they're going to unfollow you, at some point pretty quickly. And so it goes back to Batson. I keep thinking of Batson Bladesmithing Symposium over in Alabama. You and I both started going to that years and years ago. And one of the great things about that is that everybody over there, and this is in the bladesmithing community in general that I've found, everybody's really willing to share their knowledge. There's not a lot of people going, I don't want to show you this technique. Very early on, I remember going to Batson and seeing people that were just superheroes in the bladesmithing world that were showing up to Batson. And I could walk up to these people and ask them, hey, how did you do that? And they would stop and talk to me, about it and tell me. And it was just, so that's been a theme in bladesmithing for me for years, is that people have given me so much help over the years that I just feel kind of obligated that I should be about the same thing.
Right.
Well, and I think it's also important to notice like a compare and contrast, right? So your Instagram account, for instance, you have maybe 2,000, 2,100 some posts, right? 83,000 followers. In comparison to that, if you look at my Instagram account, I have maybe 800 some followers, right? So you have 100 times more followers than I do, and I have maybe about half the posts. But I think it's important as a maker, but also just as a person, that you can do things right, or you can try to post up relevant content, and you really just don't hit a stride where you do become viral. And I kind of go back to that because in one way you can get an ego because you have a social media following that's large, or you become an influencer, as it were. But don't be deterred if you have less followers, because that's not the measure of a man, or the mantle of who you are, right?
Oh, no, absolutely not. Right. Yeah, and so let's say you have 800 followers and I've got 80,000. You know how many people that I regularly interact with on a daily or weekly basis on my account? It's probably 30 or 40 people, like the usual suspects that always comment and always talk and always interact. It's kind of it's a fairly small group. And that fairly small group that is consistently interacting with me, I think about those guys when I'm posting something. I think about, oh man, Mike is going to want to see this, or James is going to think this is cool. I mean, I'm thinking about certain people, these usual, and it's not 80,000 people that are interacting with me. It's a very small number. 80,000 people might be following me to see my stuff show up in their feed every once in a while, but the community is fairly small. And you can have 100 followers and have a great amount of community, on any social media platform if you've got engagement with a group.
I've kind of thought about, I guess I'm not going to do this, but I would like to reset my Facebook friends to be more of the people that I know personally and interact with. But I do also understand that that a lot of people I'm friends with that I may not know personally, but just because of the videos and also maybe people like my knives and that kind of stuff. And so it's again an opportunity to let people know when I have something new, and or if I'm working on something, some kind of instruction or something. I think people benefit from it. But you talk about the smaller community, that is something that the larger it gets, the larger your friend base gets, I see a lot of this. I don't see as many of the old guys I used to go to high school with, and or the people that I go to church with in my feeds. And I think there's things in Facebook you can do to elevate those, and maybe I need to look into that. But the point being, the larger you're following, it almost seems to dilute the interaction that you might have seeing people who you're actually closer to.
Yeah, it can for sure.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. So moving on to another subject that I guess is kind of similar. And Um, we've talked before, and this is something that I'm particularly interested in, is how you have incorporated your knife making or your blacksmithing into ministry opportunities. I know you spoke at the church in Collierville. Me and my son went out and got to listen to you, and that was excellent. But talk about some other ways that you've been able to. I know you're a Christian, and that's important to you. And talk about ways in which you've been able to tie your blacksmithing stuff to your to some type of ministry, using it for the glory of God.
Yeah, yeah, that's a big part of it, and that's one of the reasons why uh, you just said on Facebook you've got people that aren't your friends. I've generally got a rule on Facebook. If someone sends me a friend request, I generally will accept it because, for one, Facebook is where I post a little bit more faith-based kind of content, but I figure that's an opportunity, for one, for people to see me share Christ occasionally. Two, it's an opportunity for them to buy something from me, you know. Um, but
Money changer. No, sorry.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, so you know, being a Christian, I feel like we're all made in the image of God, and God is the great creator, and so I feel like everyone has the ability to create and to make things, and I feel like it makes the Lord happy when we use our talents in that way to make things, to make beautiful things out of raw materials. I think that's a God honoring thing, and if you can also do it where you can bring people in who, for example, I've got a men's group that meets in my shop on Wednesday nights. It's a very small group, 4 or 5 of us meet there. But that group started out of a desire to get some guys to come to an event or a small group that normally hasn't felt like any other small group or opportunity at the church was kind of for them. Like they just didn't enjoy or feel that they fit in some of these other places. But you get guys into a shop environment and put tools in their hand, and it relaxes them, and it opens up opportunities for fellowship and discipleship, and that they otherwise might not be open to. And the other part of it is our church is fairly large, and it's easy just to go to church on Sunday and see people and wave at them, and go to the church and listen to the message and hear the word, and then leave and wave at the same people coming and going, and not really get to know some of the people. And so that was another idea, was, hey, I want to get to know some of these guys. And so we started doing this men's group, and it's been a lot of fun. And we meet, and we study the Bible for about 45 minutes to an hour, and then we just start playing with tools. And the last 2 times we've done it, we've made knives, and so I still do get some knife making in on Wednesday nights. But we're at this point in the current small group, we just forged out the tips and handles on our blades, and we're just starting to get into the blade bevel forging, and we'll probably finish these blades up over the next 3 or 4 weeks. But it's been fun to look for ways to use knife making and bladesmithing, as a way to reach people for Christ. And I was invited to come out and demonstrate for the Texas Blacksmith Association meeting last year, and that was really pretty cool. As a Christian, I think all the demonstrators were Christians that year, and I think everybody during their demo at some point or another shared their faith journey, and so that was really interesting. And it's been neat to see the ways that God has opened doors in that regard. When the whole Forged in Fire thing happened, as a Christian, I look for the reason or God's purpose in events in my life. I look at things that happen in my life, or opportunities or events, and I look at, okay, what is the Lord's purpose in this? And so when Forged in Fire happened, I was kind of like, man, how is God, where is God in a TV show like this? What is the opportunity here? And so one of my goals when I went on that show was to represent not only myself well, but to represent the Lord well, and to not do anything that, cast dispersion on Christians. I didn't want to go on the show and someone to come back and say, "Oh, he's a hypocrite," or he's not practicing what he preaches. And then also just the parallels between the forging and the Christian life. There's a lot of parallels there between the process of taking a piece of metal and the transformation that happens between, going through a fire, so to speak, and coming out refined on the other end. And so there's been a lot of opportunities there to use those parallels to talk about the process of being a Christian.
So, kind of along the same lines, and maybe you already answered this a little bit, but for you personally, are there any life lessons or personal growth or truths that you have gained from your time as a knife maker or blacksmith? Things that you might not would have known or grown to know or experience otherwise. I'm not talking about just like general experience, like going on shows and that kind of stuff, but I'm talking about life lessons, personal growth.
Yeah, as a knife maker or a blacksmith, I think in this craft, we experience failure at a rate that maybe is higher than in other crafts. I don't know if that's true or not, but it just feels that way. And maybe it feels that way because when you put so much of your blood, sweat, and tears into making a knife and then you discover a fatal crack during the last 400 grit hand sanding stage, that's kind of a soul crushing experience the first couple of times it happened. But you learn that it's just part of it, and you learn that it's a mistake that you made, or you skipped some step you shouldn't have skipped, and you paid a price for it. And so one of the great life lessons that I've learned through forging and blacksmithing and bladesmithing, whatever you want to call it, has just been how important failure is in our lives, and how important it is that we do fail and we learn from it and we change from it. And that's just been one of those things it's become a precious thing to me now. I don't get really upset about failure in the shop the way I used to. I kind of look at a failure now and I kind of smile about it and I go, oh, okay, well, that's a new thing that I learned. And whereas when you're young and when you're just starting in the craft, when you have those failures, you want to chunk the knife through the window or throw it off in the woods. You get really angry about it and it makes you want to quit. And now those kind of failures don't make me really angry. They don't really make me want to quit. They just make me realize, hey, that's, at this point, after having so many different kinds of failures, if I have a really bad failure now, man, that's a valuable lesson. That's something I need to pay attention to. And that carries over into my life, that carries over into all areas that, if I'm failing somewhere or if I'm screwing up somewhere, well, that's somewhere that I need to make adjustments and changes.
All right, man, we're winding it down. I think this may be the last question here, but what advice would you give someone interested in, or someone who's just getting started in bladesmithing or blacksmithing? I asked the same question to Aaron. If you could look back at yourself in 2001 and or maybe even 2000 and give yourself some advice, what would that be? Or how would you encourage somebody who's just wanting to get into it? Maybe somebody today that don't know where to start. What advice would you give a young maker?
Well, I would tell them to go buy the Melton Forge Works guide to getting started in forging.
Is that a for real thing?
It's a for real thing. I wrote an
Okay.
ebook a while back. Yeah, with that in mind. No,
And then
in all
after that, go buy
seriousness,
your hammer making video.
that's right. Yeah. No, I think what I would tell somebody is to, and this is something I didn't do for a long time, is I didn't spend money on classes. And I think the number one thing that I think people the big tendency is it's a lot easier to chase equipment than it is to chase skill. And I fell into that same equipment gathering trap, even with the $50 knife shop and as rudimentary of a equipment set as I started with. I very quickly moved into the I've got to get this tool, I've got to get that tool kind of mindset. And instead, I should have been into the I've got to take this class, I've got to go to this seminar mindset, because the times in my maker career or maker journey where I excelled or progressed the fastest or the most were after going to classes. And so I would just encourage young makers, if it's super easy to get all excited about getting a power hammer or a huge, nice anvil, but you'll get so much more out of a really good class, than some fancy piece of equipment right off the bat. And so that would probably be the number one thing that I would encourage people that are just getting started to do, is to seek out opportunities to take classes from good teachers.
Well, good deal. All right, man. Well, Derek, I appreciate it. Tell us real quick what your website is and where you can be found on social media and how people can interact with you and purchase that ebook you just talked about.
Yeah, that's funny. I wrote that ebook. I kept a Google Doc for years of all these different equipment recommendations and stuff. And I got kind of tired of people I got tired of answering the same kind of questions over and over. So I started writing this guide, and it just turned into an ebook. But my website is just my name. It's Derek Melton, DerekMelton.com. I'm on Instagram as Derek Melton, DerekMelton. But funny enough, there's another Derek Melton out there. It spells his name the exact same way, but he's Derek Melton. And he's also a knife maker, and he's a pastor of a church somewhere. And he's a really good knife maker too. But yeah, my website is just my name, DerekMelton.com, and I'm just Derek Melton on all the different social medias.
Well, Aaron, is there anything else you want to talk to Derek about? I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you to close us out.
Yeah, no, I mean, Derek, it's been really great to learn more about you, the person. I really feel that your social media presence does represent you pretty well, because you're talking to you through this interview. I feel like there's a lot of consistency between the two. So that's a good thing, right?
Good.
But yeah, it's been a pleasure to get to interview you and get to hear some conversations and things that, a lot of people might not necessarily know about you. And I just, really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you going to Bladeshow this year?
I will not be going to Bladeshow Atlanta. I'll be going to Bladeshow Texas and mingling around. I've had a table at Bladeshow Texas the last 2 years, and I had one at Atlanta the last 2 years. But I kind of burned out's not the right word. But I've put a lot of money over the last few years into going to shows, and the over under financially for me, it just hasn't really been there. So I've made some decisions to do more local Texas shows, and to just try to do orders and try to, spend more time in the shop than going and traveling and working towards shows. So we'll see how that works out, and maybe next year I'll get back into it.
Yeah, I think this will be my first year to have a table at Blade, and it will be a very non-Bladeshow table. It's going to be a lot of blacksmith stuff.
Well, that's good. The one thing that's good about Blade magazine and what they bring to the table is variety, I think. That's one thing I've always enjoyed about going to the shows, is that you get just a large swath of things that are knives, bladesmithing, blacksmithing, and material related. So I usually, if I sell some knives at a show, I usually end up giving it right back to somebody for materials.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you once again for joining us for another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.